Good morning. I'm here to share my story, and first I want to congratulate you on making it forward in the Eurovision competition a couple of days ago. Iceland did not, so we are very impressed with you. Very happy to be here. I started my career in corporate America, and when I was first given the responsibility of hiring people, a vice mentor of mine, a male mentor, gave me some good advice. He told me that when I interviewed a man, I should listen to how he described his abilities, and then I would be wise to divide by 2. And when I interviewed a woman, I should do the same, but then I should multiply by 2. Now, this advice has served me well, and this was in the mid-1990s. But the truth of the matter is that the confidence gap is still real. And we continue to tell women that they just need to be more confident in order to get access to leadership, influence, money, and power in this world. I am not sure this is good advice. Because what are you supposed to do with that? Are you supposed to power pose? Are you supposed to lower your voice? Are you supposed to say I more than we? I'm not sure any of that is good for leadership, or that it feels authentic to most of us women leaders, or male leaders who want to lead in a different way. And I'm also concerned, after living through the economic collapse in my country, that overconfidence can be very dangerous. I will go as far as to say that the overconfidence of a homogeneous group pretty much drove our country off a cliff. So for me, I don't think the answer is confidence. For me, everything I have done has started with courage. Let me tell you how I define courage. It is the combination of heart, finding the truth that resides in your heart, and humility, knowing that no person is more important than another, and we are all here to serve. And I don't know a better expression of courage than to speak and act out the truth that resides in your heart in order to try to make the world a better place. So I'm not saying confidence doesn't matter. I'm just saying that I would have done very few things in my life if I waited until I was confident. So I have embraced courage, and through that, I have developed what I think is the right type of confidence through trying. And I hope to inspire you to think in the same way. So I was only 7 years old when I decided to matter. And I was inspired by this day. This is October 24th in 1975. The women in Iceland decided to take the day off, or essentially they went on a strike. They refused to do work, whether it was at home or if they held professional jobs. And on that day, nothing worked in Iceland. And I believe the courage and the solidarity that they showed on that day paved the way for the fact that 5 years later, Iceland was the first country in the world to democratically elect a woman as president. Not only was she a woman, she was a single mother, and she ran against 3 male leaders, and she was frequently asked, how can you become president? You're a woman. Now, this is 1980. And not only are you a woman, a rude fellow asked in one of the campaign meetings, you're really just half a woman. He was referring to the fact that she had had 1 breast removed as a breast cancer survivor. She showed me how women can do leadership when she responded, well, I intended on leading this nation, not breastfeeding it. How beautiful. So I am here because of these women who came before me. And all of you are here because of the women and the girls and the boys that come after you. Don't ever forget about that. So I have been passionate about closing the gender gap ever since that young age. And I have participated in many different projects, and I just want to touch up on a few of them. When I returned home after 10 years in corporate America, I shortly after joined the foundation of a new university, Reykjavik University. And one of the first projects I was asked to create and lead was the Women Empowerment and Entrepreneurship Program. And I was actually reluctant to do that. I had spent 10 years in corporate America, and I will tell you that most of my role models, they were not that comfortable talking about the fact that they were women. Most of them played according to the male rules of the game, and so did I. But one night, when I was working alongside the dean of the business school, he leaned in and said to me, "I just love working with you. It feels just like working with a man." He meant it as sincere praise. I know he did. But for me, it was a wake-up call. And a few days later, I found the courage to create and lead this empowerment program. And through that, I met Kristin, who you see in the picture. And during the 3 years that I led this program and we touched the lives of so many women and girls in Iceland, I really realized that we don't have a competence gap. Women are definitely capable of leading and creating companies and doing everything in at least as good of a way as we've done it, and maybe even better. But we still do have this confidence gap. And I felt that that confidence gap was especially great when it came to money. So Kristin and I met through one of the women's networking events. Whoever said business doesn't get done in women's business networks. And a few years later, we created an investment company called Auður Capital. And we distinctly created the company with the vision to incorporate more feminine values into finance. Now, this is in 2007, so please realize that 11 years ago, Iceland was at the top of its financial bubble, and no one really thought anything was wrong or anything needed to be done differently. But we decided to create a company that would focus on what we called profit with principles, and then we had other very specific values and principles that we asked all of our employees to embrace. To make a long story short, a year and a half later, Iceland experienced its infamous financial meltdown, and our company was one of the few that was left standing and probably the only one managing other people's money that didn't lose any money. So we feel that the values that we embraced at that time showed its value. And since I have been even more relentless at advocating for different principles and values at the heart of business. And I do believe that having women and men around the table is key to getting there. Just to be clear, putting feminine values into finance to us was not about women being better than men. It was about diversity being better than sameness, which had been the formula before Iceland's economic collapse. So during these years, I also became a mom, to a boy first and then a girl. And when our daughter was born, she started her life in intensive care. And during one of those terrifying long nights, before I knew she would be okay, I made a promise that I would do even more to try to close the gender gap before she would turn 20. Well, she was okay, and she's 14 now. So I had to come up with something big. So I ran for president. This is 2 years ago, and I was a very unlikely candidate. As a matter of fact, the first one with a business background, really, to run for president. I was an independent candidate, and initially more than 20 people announced their intention to run. It would be an understatement to say that this is one of the hardest decision I've ever made, and one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also the most rewarding journey of my life. Ultimately, 9 candidates qualified, and at the end, the race boiled down to being between 3 men and me. But it wasn't easy. And 45 days before the actual election day, the polls showed me with 1% support. And everyone asked if I was going to quit. To me, that was never an option, because I ran for reasons far more important than my own ego. So I kept going, and I sought strength to the principles that I had decided to found the campaign on, and I had asked everyone working with me to embrace. I ran to be of service. This was not about my ego. It was about trying to do better for our country. I decided to enjoy the journey, no matter what would happen. So no fear was allowed, because joy is actually the best medicine against fear. I also decided to be completely transparent and answer any questions that voters would ask. I think those of us seeking public office should set that standard. People deserve to know all about us. So I answered any questions possible and included all of them on my website. And against the advice of many, I decided to embrace girl power and made no excuses for it. I ran largely to be a role model for girls and boys, for that matter. Our former president Vigdis often says that after she had been in office for several terms, a young boy came to see her and asked her, "Can boys also become presidents?" See, role models, they really do matter. And so armed with these principles and a clear intention to make a difference, I actually managed to surprise everyone on election night when the first numbers came in, and I came in neck to neck with the leading candidate and our current president. I don't know who was more surprised, me or him. But I have great respect for him, and we are good friends, and we got a good president, just to be clear. I ended up with about almost 30% of the vote, and most people said that I only needed another week or two to win. To me, the real victory was not about going from 1% to nearly a third of the vote, although that was a testament of personal resilience, and I learned so much along the way. The real impact for me were examples like these. This is a picture of 3 preschool girls and a boy. They're walking in Reykjavik, and they come across a campaign poster when I'm proudly wearing the national team jersey of Iceland's football team. This is during the Euro Cup. And they find the need to kiss that picture. To me, that was all the win I possibly needed. If you go back to the story from President Vigdis when she talks about, "I want to lead this nation, not breastfeed it," well, it almost looks like I'm breastfeeding them there, doesn't it? I also took a lot of comfort in the fact that I earned the greatest following among the young voters, so I know I made an impact beyond the actual votes. So my message to any of you is, you can go for something that is bigger than you think that it is, and you can make an impact on your own life and others, even when you don't win. I got a new title after running for president. The New Yorker called me a living emoji of sincerity. Now, I had to ask my kids what an emoji is, and they still make fun of me for that. But the fact of the matter is that there was a time in my life that I might not have been comfortable with that title. But today, I think it is my favorite. Why? I think there is a syndrome that plagues too many of our leaders. I call it, and it has been called by others, the Hubris Syndrome. Its symptoms include lack of empathy and overconfidence. I firmly believe that if we want to save the world, we need women leaders and male leaders who are unafraid to show compassion towards others and the world we live in. We need more humility and less hubris in this world. Before I leave you to a conversation that I hope you will participate in, I want to end with this thought. We need leaders in this world who are willing to go out there and transform the world and make it better. So please, run for president or offer yourself up for big and bold leadership or entrepreneurship. Be unafraid to go for it. You will grow for it, and you might make a positive impact way beyond what you believe. But more importantly, I want to urge you to become presidents of your own lives. Take care of the most important asset, you and your loved ones. This is me and my family on election night. We celebrated as we had won because we went through the whole journey and we became better from it. For me, what is it to be a president of your own life? For me, it's all about being clear on why you are here and how you're going to lead and live your life. I wrote a manifesto where I basically defined, why am I here? Why do I go out to Lithuania or Singapore or wherever else? What is it that I'm doing? And how am I going to do it? I am absolutely convinced today that the most important work we do in life is to become clear on why we are here and how we're going to go through life. And I spent the first half of my life being very clear on the purpose and principles of every organization I worked for or that I founded, and teaching students to do that for their companies. But I never really made the time or the space to be equally clear about why I am here and how I'm going to live life. So I encourage you to not wait for dramatic incidents in your life before you become presidents of your own life. I had to have a few of my own. So become the president of your own life, transform your inner life and who you are, and be clear on that, and you will have the power and the confidence to transform the world, which desperately needs the service of every humble heart in this room. Thank you.
Well, I never thought that I would be on a stage of National Drama Theatre. I've been in the audience many times, but not on a stage. And I'm also very happy and honored, I should say, to be able to discuss and talk with you, with inspirational leader. I also encourage, if you have any questions, there are microphones of both sides of the room, so you can ask questions to Halla. But I will perhaps start with a rather personal question. I saw your pictures of your family. I understood that your family played, especially your daughter, played an important role in your decision to run for the president, and she was a support and inspiration during the campaign. But if you look around Europe, most of the leaders are childless leaders. And there's I mean, look at Angela Merkel, Macron, or Theresa May. Most actually the leaders are childless leaders by choice. And there's a stereotype that if you want to run for the top, especially in a political career, but also in the corporate boardrooms, children can become an obstacle. What would you say? I mean, you are an example that's not the case, but what would you say? How can we fight this stereotype? With policies or with something else?
I think that's a great question, and I will be very honest that when I was encouraged to run for president, my first reaction was, who am I to run for president? And then the second reaction was, how is this going to impact my children? So I think this is a very real topic that needs to be discussed. Ultimately, after a lot of time and a lot of internal thinking and self-doubt and even the imposter syndrome, which you may have heard of, which many women in particular suffer from, but I also know many men who do as well. I ultimately was able to ask a better question, and that is, who am I not to serve? Because if you think about it, when we have children, I really do think it changes us. So it is my opinion that we become better leaders, because our definition of success becomes more of a long-term one. And we look at our children every day, and we can't help but to think, how are we leaving this planet for them? What kind of a society are we building and developing for them? I really do think we become better leaders. So I actually think, not to say that the leaders who are childless are not, but I'm absolutely certain it certainly does not make us worse at leadership to be mothers or fathers. But it is important to live in a country, and I am blessed with living in a country that has good policies and has allowed women and men to not have to choose between work and life, but to be able to do both. And that goes back to infrastructure. Access to childcare is incredibly important. It goes back to culture. Embracing the fact that it is not just the children do not usually have two parents, not always, but usually. And it's not to be taken for granted that the person who cooks the meals has to be female. In my home, it's the male who cooks the meals.
Mine as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that makes a big help. So, I mean, I live in a country where the policies have been good and where the culture has been supportive. But I don't think it would be if the women of Iceland in 1975 had not had the courage to show that a country's economy and society doesn't work unless we use all of our people. And particularly for those of us in small countries. I mean, if we don't use all of our people, we're just losing out on economic growth and social progress.
Yeah, I totally agree that having children probably not only makes you a better leader, but from my experience, I can tell you that it makes you a better negotiator.
Yes.
I still lose most of the negotiations with my 3-year-old, but it also makes you more humble, something that you started from. You understand that you're not the most important person in the world, and makes you a better person for that.
Exactly.
But policies obviously are very right, and I think Nordic countries in that respect are leading countries when it comes to paternity leave. I know that in Sweden, for example, I mean, in order to reap the maximum benefit and have the longest paternity leave, both parents are encouraged to be with their children, with a small child. And this is one of the areas where the policies can probably support the inclusion and higher participation of women in a labor force in general.
Absolutely, and I have to add here, because you mentioned paternity leave. In the early 2000s, Iceland had the courage again to make it an equal right for mothers and fathers and actually require a paternity leave. And we also created a fund that allowed us to support higher pay during that paternity leave. And this made a huge difference. So we're still trying to push forward and be ahead of the game, but I think paternity leave was absolutely key to greater gender equality in Iceland.
I was surprised to find out that you have almost equal share of female and male in the parliament, and also your boardrooms are very equally set up in that respect, something that we cannot be proud of. Only 21% of Lithuanian parliament members are women, and that's always been the case. What is the success there? It's not only the policies, it's probably some sort of attitudes that have to be cultivated.
Absolutely, and in politics, I mean, I can go back to the women who came before me, but in 1983, women in Iceland founded the first all-female political party. And their biggest achievement, they no longer exist, and they didn't need to exist for that long, but their existence made every other political party think about who they ran. And so just the fact that they were there changed the nature of politics in Iceland, I believe. The same thing I could say happened with our investment company. When we survived the economic meltdown, and hardly anyone did, every bank started talking about gender equality in the boardroom, etc. So it is important sometimes to have these sort of small initiatives or new and creative and courageous initiatives that move everybody else along. But I think I will be very honest, even if I think it takes the solidarity and courage of women to make the change. None of what has happened in Iceland would have happened if we had not had great men involved in this. This conversation about gender equality, it has too much been women talking to women. And it's not really a conversation that is a women's conversation. It really is an economic issue. The strongest economies, they do empower women and men equally. It is a social progress issue, as I said before, because the countries that do have gender equality, they are also the most progressive. So it's a very important issue for every country to think of. And in business, we make more money when we have women and men in the boardroom. And we have better conversations, we prepare better for meetings, we make better decisions. So all the evidence is there, but that has never been enough. So in Iceland, one of the reasons we made gender balance happen in the boardroom, and I was very involved in this because I was the first female CEO of the Iceland Chamber of Commerce when we started talking about the lack of women in the boardroom. And what we did is we made a voluntary agreement initially. We said, okay, we have 12% women in the boardroom. We must be able to do better than that. And so we made a voluntary agreement, women's organizations, the politicians, and the business organizations, and said, let's get it done in 5 years, because the evidence is there. It's good for all of us. Let's get it done. It's good for the economy. It's good for our businesses. But we couldn't get there. But we did well in 5 years. We went from 12% to 25%. But that's not gender balance. It really means that women are still tokens or a minority in that setting. So it doesn't really change culture. So we put gender quota laws in 2013. requiring 40% of either gender to be present for a boardroom to be okay for any company with more than 50 people. And when we did this, about 1/3 of male board directors were in favor of it, 2/3 were against it, and 2/3 of female directors were for it, and 1/3 of female directors were against it. Only 2 years after putting the gender quota law into action, 2/3 of male directors were for it, and 90% of female directors. So everybody's experience of having gender balance in the boardroom was a positive one.
Yeah. So it's one clear example how seemingly
policy matters, but culture changes because the policy makes it possible for culture to change. Without paternity leave, culture in the home wouldn't change. Without gender quota, the culture in the boardroom isn't going to change. And every woman that's there as a token is going to behave just like the man, and maybe, you know, suffer from overconfidence and lack of humility. Sorry to say, but I think that's part of our problem in leadership in the world today.
how does the picture look when you go a little bit down the ladder? And Davile has mentioned that we have companies here that have equal pay for male and female, but if you look on a national level, that's still unsatisfactory in Lithuania and probably also in Iceland. And we've seen recently a movement towards more transparency, where, for example, in UK, companies with more than 250 employees are required to disclose their gender gap in wage. Do you think that's also the way, and what's the situation in Iceland?
Well, it's interesting that you ask right now, because we just recently passed the equal pay law in Iceland, and again kind of paved the way for the rest of the world. And it's gotten a lot more positive attention outside of Iceland than inside Iceland, to be honest, because a lot of companies think this is a lot of work. But we did it. We had the courage to do it, because of course it's 2018. Why would we even be talking about whether to pay women and men the same for the same work?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It is a human right for sure, but it's also just a business matter. 2/3 of graduates from almost all universities today are women, and they are outperforming in terms of their grades. Every country is investing enormous amounts of money into educating its female capital. It is the stupid business not to attract and retain them to work and fully use their capabilities and the investment we've made in them to create economic growth and business prosperity. So for me, and that's just a fundamental part of attracting and keeping women at work, is to pay them the same money for the work that they do. It seems obvious, but we again needed legislation, I think, to make that happen. We still have a gender pay gap, but it's going to go away with this. I firmly believe so. It's a complicated process, so some companies have complained about that, sort of to get the certification that you are paying equally. But just the fact that you sit down and take a look at what you're actually doing, it will surprise you, not just male leaders, but female leaders as well, that we do have so many conscious and mostly unconscious bias at play in our world. So we are not always doing this consciously. We're doing this because somehow in our head, when, you know, both women and men, when we think of a leader, we think of a man.
It's interesting that you mentioned this, because consciously, just 5 years ago, I was unaware that there is a problem in terms of different opportunities and in terms of wage gaps. And probably unconscious biases is something that you see everywhere, not only in the boardrooms, not only in the expectations who will become the leader of the country, who will become the leader of the company, but from very early days in life, expectations of what should a boy and a girl study, what should they like. And this is probably one of those areas that also builds on and creates different choices in career and different ambitions. Do you feel that is one of those problems that you...
Oh, yes. And this is actually one of my passions today, because after running for president, after 20 years of being really involved in gender equality work, I still came across some surprises of my own. Even living in the country that leads the world when it comes to closing the gender gap, I discovered things like the media spoke to the leading male candidates 50 to 60% more than me. Part of that problem may have been me, part of that problem was probably within the media, and not consciously necessarily, but unconsciously. The male candidates were able to raise more money, they had more political muscle, access to more political muscle, etc. So I really did confront some challenges in this area. So I decided after my campaign to go into my daughter's class, she was 13 at the time, and teach a session that was supposed to be about career choices to the kids of 13, boys and the girls, for her entire school. And it was so interesting. I started the experiment by asking them all to please draw a picture of an entrepreneur, which I had been, a teacher, which I had also been, and president, which I had tried to become. And with two exceptions, all of the girls and all of the boys drew a male entrepreneur, a male president, and a female teacher. Now, this is Iceland, and this is 2017, or 2016 to 17. And it just really blew me away. So then after that, I showed them all kinds of evidence, and we talked about this, and I came a long way with them. They spoke about the fact that our female football team went to the Euro Cup long before our male football team did, but they never got the attention that our male team did for doing so. And the kids started sort of realizing it. And then at the end of the class, I asked each one of them to take a few minutes to think about what they wanted to be, and sort of write down 1 to 3 things you could imagine being. And I'm sorry to say, even after a very good conversation where I thought I was a decent teacher, they actually came up with very gendered choices. So I am absolutely convinced that if we want to fix this, we need to start working earlier with our girls and our boys. We need to train girls in courage. Courage is far more important of a curriculum than even STEM, and I'm all for science and technology and engineering and math training, but we do need to teach girls courage, and we need to teach boys emotional intelligence and empathy and humility. Yes. Because there's so much in the environment that pushes them up and so much that pushes girls down. Now, having said that, I need to say this, and I'm speaking to you, and there are male leaders in this room as well. I am also concerned about the fact that we're losing boys out of school, and they're not performing as well as girls. And that's partly because most of our teachers in early education are now women. So I think it's as problematic that we have gender imbalance in teaching as we have gender imbalance in finance or leadership. I just think gender balance is going to create better education, better leadership, and better economies and society. It's as simple as that.
Well, I think the fact that in this audience there are relatively few men, I should put it this way, also illustrates the fact that we are not humble enough and overconfident sometimes, and we think that we know better. So that also tells us something. And clearly the fact that there are very few men teachers also serves to the worse outcomes in terms of the stereotypes that are seen later in life. But I want to go back a little bit and ask you more about your success. And I think that's, regardless of the fact that you have not become president, that was a clear success. You moved from 1% with no political background, with business background, which was not probably a benefit in your case, to a second place, and you beat the polls. I saw the data by a very wide margin. So you unexpectedly moved very close to the leader. So one of the success of these factors you mentioned was sincerity, courage, but not only that. What was behind that? What can you also suggest to the other leaders that might want to take the political career?
Well, I would say whether it's about running for political office or offering yourself up for leadership, for me, it's all about being clear on how you work, not what you want to do, but how you want to work. And so having those 4 principles really helped me. I mean, the 1% day was a difficult day. Make no mistake, when everybody asked me, are you going to quit? The easiest decision would have been to quit. Very few volunteers showed up at my campaign office that day, I can tell you that. And those who did, they didn't know what to say to me, because they all knew I could be good at this. But I was dealing with issues like the fact that in Iceland, after our economic collapse, trust in business and people who came from finance was very low. And I was not, I was known in the business community, and I was known for the principles that my company survived through, but general public didn't necessarily know that story, and they were generally distrustful of people who came from the world of money and business. And I don't blame them. I mean, during the presidential campaign, we had the Panama Papers. And as a matter of fact, our prime minister had to resign shortly after I announced my candidacy, which was probably another reason why it was hard to get to media. There was so much going on. And then our sitting president, who had been in office for 20 years, entered the race after saying he was not going to be part of the race. So, I was just not even on the media radar at the time. And so there was a lot of distrust around this. So, but for me, it really comes down to this. If you care enough about something, and if in your heart you know that there's something that is broken or something that can be better, and in my opinion, what's broken in Iceland, and actually in the world, is the social contract. The social contract broke during the financial crisis in 2008, and we haven't fixed it. We have printed money, and we have tried to fix a lot of things, but we haven't really fixed the fact that we have rising inequalities, we have a planet that's suffering. We haven't really fixed the big issues that we need to be better at in order to look our children in their eyes. And I ran because I care about looking my children in the eyes and all of their other children of that age and the next generation after. And I don't think we have the right to take out profit in our lifetimes at the expense of theirs.
Yeah.
I don't think we do. So I care deeply about the values that are at the heart of leadership in my country. And so I went out there with the 4 values, being myself. On the 1% day, I decided no more playing a president. A lot of people try to advise me, dress like that, don't say that, do this, don't do that. And I listened initially because I was new in this role, and I thought other people must know more than me about this. And I'm humble enough to know that I can learn from others. But on the 1% day, I decided, screw that, sorry, and let's just be me. That's all I can do. And so I guess my at the heart of that message is we can never be really good at anything unless we authentically are who we are and have the courage to speak the truth that sits in our heart and do leadership from the set of values that are really authentic to us. When we do that, and it takes a lot of courage to do that, then nothing is impossible. Nothing, really. And most people think I only needed another week or 2. But I don't really dwell on that because I just think that the impact I was able to make by being part of the debate about the future of Iceland has made impact in so many different ways. And so it's not just about winning, it's about growing yourself and becoming a better person from everything that we do.
So honesty, sincerity, integrity,
transparency,
courage, all these things
and
are...
girl power. Let's not forget about that, to be unapologetically girl power.
I mean, I can tell a lot of things about that. Do we have any questions in the audience? I do not see you, but you can see us very well. Just shout out if you have an important question. We're almost out of time, but just to build on what you just said, I mean, I already mentioned that we have only around 20% of women in our parliament.
Yes.
And I was trying to run in my head all of the leaders of the political parties that we have. I don't think we have a woman who is the leader of the political parties. Only men lead political parties. We have a presidential elections next year. And out of 10 potential or already announced candidates, is only 1 woman. And I was just thinking what you just said. And we recently, or should I say constantly, had huge political scandals. And a lot of population is disenchanted and very disappointed with politics in Lithuania. And I just realized that a lot of these problems could be fixed if we just had a little bit more women running for the political offices. And this is something that I really hope to see in 2019 in presidential elections and 2020 in parliament elections, because this lack of humble, sincere, courageous approach to what we do is probably one of the reasons why we had all the political scandals here in Lithuania. So
I agree.
Yeah.
We need more women to run for office of any type. And the world will be better for everyone if we do. And it's not a women's issue, really. It is about creating a more sustainable, more sensible world.
Well, I hope women in this audience have heard your example and your advice. I hope that men in some cases will understand and be more humble and will step back when they have to. And our time is up, so unfortunately we don't have any questions, but perhaps later we will have more discussions.
Happy. And if you have questions, you can also tweet to me, and I try to always, maybe not immediately, but I try to answer questions if they're tweeted at me, so feel free to. And run for president, but be the president of your own lives too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming to Lithuania.
Thank you.
And
it's my pleasure.
I have the same advice to you. Run for president again. And better luck next time.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thanks.